Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This is Rabia Batul from English Department of Rawalpindi Women University. Today we have to continue our previous lecture that was about Louis Pasteur. As you know, it is written by Margaret Avery, and in this essay, she has described the life, work, and character of Louis Pasteur as a scientist, as a chemist, and as a great researcher. She shows clearly how Pasteur worked to find cures for different diseases which were extremely dangerous, and he benefited man, in fact, all humanity for all times. Now let's read the text. The first human disease to which Pasteur applied inoculation was hydrophobia or rabies, the horrible illness produced by the bite of a mad dog. To give one some idea of its horror, one needs only read such description as the following of a child of 5 admitted to a French hospital. And the description goes like this, which tells us about the horrible symptoms of the disease. The unfortunate little patient presented all the characteristics of hydrophobia: spasms, restlessness, shudders at the least breath of air, an ardent thirst, accompanied with an absolute impossibility of swallowing, convulsive movements, fits of furious rage. The child died after 24 hours of horrible suffering, suffocated by the mucus which filled the mouth. So from here you can understand that how deadly this disease might be and how great would be the achievement of Pasteur if he finds the remedy for such a disease. As a matter of fact, its germ has never been found, but it was known that part of the body affected in hydrophobia was the nervous tissue, and Pasteur tried taking some of the nervous tissues of an animal which had died of the disease, right? So, as the germ of this disease was not found, what did Pasteur do? He took the nervous tissue of an affected animal which had this disease and which died of this disease. And let's read further. What did he do with it? Uh, Pasteur tried taking some of the nervous tissues of an animal which had died of the disease and attenuating it, which he found could be done by exposing the spinal cord of rabid rabbits to dry air, which weakened it until after 14 days it was harmless. So in this way, he attenuated and tried to prepare a sort of vaccine out of it. The attenuated spinal cord introduced into dogs rendered them immune to hydrophobia, but the treatment was not tried on human beings till 1885, when a boy, Joseph Meester, was brought to Paris for treatment from a little place in Alsace. He uh, he had been bitten by a mad dog 2 days before. Now, human beings do not, as a rule, develop hydrophobia for a month or so after being bitten, and Pasteur, being as usual extremely anxious to ward off suffering, undertook the treatment of the boy by inoculations. Now, the writer has mentioned an incident of the treatment of a human case. Previously, uh, the inoculation was done of the attenuated spinal cord by Pasteur. It was used for the dogs. Now, it was human beings' turn. The first human case was treated like this in 1885. Now, human beings do not, as a rule, develop hydrophobia for a month or so after being bitten, and Pasteur, uh, being as usual extremely anxious to ward off suffering, undertook the treatment of the boy by inoculations, which were continued for 10 days. Meanwhile, the boy was hardly ill at all and played about the laboratory very happily, though Pasteur was devoured by fears and anxiety about the results. Pasteur was greatly afraid of the results of the drug or of his treatment or experiment, but the boy showed the symptoms of health and recovery. However, the boy was absolutely cured, and 2 months later, a shepherd who had been bitten by a mad dog was similarly cured, and 3 months later, 350 cases had been treated, with only one death. By 1899, more than 23,000 people had undergone the treatment, and the number today must be larger still. The deaths among these were less than half percent, and there is no doubt that many of the rest were saved from the terrible disease by Pasteur's work. So it was such a great achievement on his part. Now let's see some related pictures. First one is uh, the picture which explains hydrophobia, that is the extreme or irrational fear of water, especially as a symptom of rabies in humans. Right? Second picture shows what is rabies. Rabies is a deadly virus spread to people from the saliva of infected animals. The rabies virus is usually transmitted through a bite. And lastly, here's the picture of the boy who is bitten by mad dog, and the symptoms are written irritability or aggressiveness, excessive movements or agitation, confusion, bizarre or strange thoughts or hallucinations, muscle spasms, and usually postures, seizures, convulsions, weakness, or paralysis when a person cannot move some part of the body. So, all this was about the previous paragraphs which we have read. These pictures have explained each and every fact discussed. Okay, but though this was the last of Pasteur's great discoveries, its results were by no means confined to the cure of hydrophobia, for the fame of his success stirred up other scientists to try similar methods of cure for other diseases. And in the 10 years between 1880 and 1890, they discovered the germs of consumption, diphtheria, typhoid, lockjaw, cholera, and Malta fever. So all these diseases, they their treatment was became possible or was made possible by other researchers uh, only because of Pasteur's work on rabies or hydrophobia. In 1893, the antitoxin which cures diphtheria was discovered, and also the protective treatment of for cholera. Before the discovery of antitoxin, 30.4% of diphtheria patients died. Now, 8.3 died. In 1894 to 95, the germs of plague and of the testifly disease in animal were found. In 1896 and 97, the protective inoculation treatment for typhoid and plague were discovered, with the result that in the Great War there was extraordinarily little typhoid in our army compared with the amount of the disease which had occurred in earlier campaigns, such as the Boer War. In India, during 1913, 93% of the British garrison were inoculated, and deaths from typhoid fell from usual 300 to 600 to only 20. So here is the series of the excellent successes in in the field of medical science, and all this was triggered by the research of the great chemist Louis Pasteur. Here are a few pictures explaining different terms which we have read in the previous paragraph. What is antitoxin? It is an antibody that counteracts a toxin. And what's a toxin? It's a poison of plant or animal origin, especially one produced by or derived from microorganisms and acting as an antigen in the body. In 1898 to 1900, it was proved that malaria and yellow fever were conveyed by mosquitoes. Now malaria each year kills millions of men and weakens millions more. It was rampant in England under the name of ague till comparatively recently it was banished by draining the malarial districts. Now that we know the cause of the disease, we can fight it in two ways: by destroying the breeding places of mosquitoes and by protecting man from the bite of the mosquito. Thus, every puddle of standing water, every pound, etc., should be drained or oiled, and all systems and wells should be kept closed in a malarial district, for the mosquito lays its eggs in water. Windows and doors must be wire got shutters, must have wire got shutters, wire gaze shutters. Beds must be protected by mosquito nets. Finally, quinine is available as a preventive and cure. It was this knowledge that enabled the Americans to construct the Panama Canal after the French had failed hopelessly with the enormous loss of life and money owing to the ravage of malaria and yellow fever. Now here we can see that even the cure for another deadly disease, malaria, was also found, and it was because of Pasteur's research and discoveries. Because he discovered the habits of germs, it was found that how malaria spreads and how it can be prevented by some preventive measures. And the cure was also sought in it was the discovery of quinine. Uh, and in the last line, it is written that as England had suffered a lot, and France and many other countries, they suffered a lot at the hand of this disease, causing millions of deaths among human beings. Uh, it was because of the research of Pasteur that Americans reconstructed Panama Canal after the French had failed hopelessly with enormous loss of the money and owing to the ravages of malaria and yellow fever. So here are few pictures explaining all which we have discussed. Uh, First picture shows a mosquito bite. Second is the picture of germs of malaria entering into human body, and then is the picture of quinine, and last picture is of Panama Canal. In 1903-205, Bruce showed that sleeping sickness, which devastates Central Africa, was conveyed by a series of tsetse. In 1905 in Uganda, it caused 8,003 deaths, and in 1910 the number was reduced to 1,546. It is impossible even to catalogue the list of the medical discoveries which have sprung from Pasteur's work, and especially since the Great World War, which forced us to deal with many hitherto little known diseases and conditions, and so to greatly increase our knowledge of them. For example, at the beginning of war, tetanus, which is also called lockjaw, was tremendously common amongst our wounded because the soil of Belgium and northern France, uh, northern France is full of the germs of the disease. Hence, it arose the custom of giving every wounded man a dose of anti-tetanus serum, which reduced the number of cases of tetanus to a tiny proportion. So, the writer says that it is almost impossible. It is beyond our capacity to catalog, to uh, count and write down the list of the medical discoveries which uh, which have their roots in Pasteur's research and Pasteur's work. And further, he has mentioned the great improvement in the treatment of uh, another deadly disease, tetanus, which was very common during the World War. Here are few pictures. The first one shows uh, the Central Africa, and next one is tasty fly, that which sometimes um, is, uh, is spelled as tasty and also known as tick-tick flies, and large biting. They are large biting flies that inhabit much of tropical Africa. What is tetanus? It is explained in the picture. The symptoms are shown in the picture. Tetanus, also called lockjaw, is a serious infection caused by a germ, and this germ produces a toxin that affects the brain and nervous system, leading to stiffness in the muscles. And last picture is of the First World War. A patient, a soldier patient of tetanus, is being injected with the medicine. As an expression of world gratitude, the Pasteur Institute was built in Paris with subscriptions which came from all parts of the world. It was opened in 1888 and was the joy of Pasteur's few remaining years. Right? An institute was built up even in Pasteur's life in 1888, and to recognize or to acknowledge his great work in the field of medical science, and it gave pleasure to him. It had been well said that Pasteur brought the facts of disease and death from the realm of the supernatural and miraculous into the realm of the natural. What does it mean? That Pasteur uh, diverted the attention of the world towards the real reason of the diseases. He, by doing his research on the habits of the germ and considering the germs as the major cause of the disease, he brought out the facts of disease and death from the kingdom of mystery and supernatural world. Further, it is said disease and death were the great mysteries, where the occult held sway. Mean there it was misunderstood that everything happens because of some magic. The malign and mysterious influence of the moon caused lunacy. It was believed that bad influence of moon causes mental sickness. There was the evil eye with its morbific powers. In fever and in epilepsy, the body was possessed by demons. Mean these diseases like fever and epilepsy, they were caused by demons or evil spirits. Tuberculosis was king's evil, to be cured by the sovereign touch. So all these misbeliefs, they held sway before Pasteur's discoveries and Pasteur's work, but he changed the direction of human thought towards the real facts and towards the great, which caused the great advancement in the medical field. Far more than all other men, Pasteur abolished forever these superstitions. So all these superstitions came to an end only because of Pasteur's great work in the field of medical science. Pasteur died in 1895 at the age of 73 and was buried in the institute. Here you can see the picture of institute that was constructed in Pasteur's name, and a statue was also placed in front of the building. Now let's see a related video that will explain the topic to you.
Louis Pasteur should be remembered for more than just inventing the process that keeps milk from spoiling.
Louis Pasteur was one of the giants of modern science.
It's because of Pasteur that we worry about whether food is pure, that medical instruments are sterilized, and ultimately that antibiotics and vaccines even exist.
He came up with the underpinnings of modern biology and germ theory, and in the process, he saved millions of people's lives.
Born in Dole, France on December 27, 1822, Louis Pasteur attended the École Normale University in Paris before becoming a professor of chemistry at the University of Lille. In 1854, he began studying the problem of spoilage with beer, wine, and milk.
He proved that the reason these beverages are spoiling was because bacteria and other microorganisms were coming in from the outside air. He developed a process called pasteurization, where these liquids are boiled and then cooled, thereby getting rid of the bacteria and microorganisms.
When you say pasteurization, most people are linking it to milk or to food products, but actually it has much more long-lasting consequences. For example, we pasteurize medical instrument, which prevents the spread of disease.
Pasteur realized that if germs were the cause of fermentation, then they could also be the cause of contagious diseases. It is because of his research that we now know to wash our hands to prevent getting sick.
Before the development of germ theory, surgeons and doctors didn't think that something as tiny as a germ could actually hurt something as large as a human being, so they often didn't even wash their hands before cutting into people. And in those days, surgery was often a death sentence.
It's through Pasteur's work that people understood that these infectious diseases were caused by bacteria as well as fungi that were coming in from the environment and invading the body.
Despite skepticism from the medical community, Pasteur continued with his research on germ theory. Eventually, he not only was able to explain the causes of many diseases, but figured out a way to prevent them.
The concept of vaccines wasn't new. Pasteur's unique contribution was to take the actual bacteria responsible for these diseases, weaken it in the lab, and then reintroduce it as a vaccine in susceptible people.
Some of the diseases that Pasteur's vaccinations were able to cure were anthrax, cholera, TB, and smallpox.
The French Academy of Sciences finally accepted the results from Pasteur's germ theory experiments in 1864.
Louis Pasteur gave us an understanding of sterile technique and the importance of antisepsis within medicine.
In 1888, the Pasteur Institute in Paris was created to further Pasteur's research, which continues to this day. Louis Pasteur died on September 28, 1895.
Louis Pasteur's legacy is felt every day in the modern world, and all of us are familiar with his work, whether we know it or not. Pasteurization, the theory of viruses, modern vaccines, hospital cleanliness. Without Pasteur's work, many of us wouldn't even be alive today.
So this was all about today's lecture. Allah Hafiz.